Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you guys so much for tuning in with me today. Today I'm gonna go ahead and do a rod and reel review. I get some questions on my Instagram and also on the channel about how I carry 8 rods with me on the kayak, and a lot of people say like, wow, that's a lot of white rods. So the first thing I'm gonna say is I use all Ducket fishing rods. I have it for about 2 years now. What kind of got me into the Ducket was about 4 years ago. I was watching Fluke Master, maybe even 5 years ago, and he had Ducket rods, and I was watching him a lot, and I really looked up to him, and he helped me a lot in the knowledge that I've gained over the past few years about bass fishing. A lot came from his channel. So when he was using Ducket rods, I decided to go ahead and pick up a Ducket rod, and since then I've collected 8 more. So the first thing I want to say is this is just what I use, and it's not what you have to use, or I'm saying like this is the only rods that you should have or anything like that. And by no means am I an expert on doing these reviews, but I just kind of wanted to give you guys more context, especially during this time that we're in quarantine and everyone's just kind of hanging out in their house, and I just figured I'd get on here and kind of show you guys my rod and reel review. So we'll go ahead and start with the spinning rods. The first rod I'm gonna talk to you guys about is the Jacob Wheeler Signature Series rod. I'm a huge fan of Jacob Wheeler. So when he first came out with his Signature Series rods, I was like super stoked, and I decided to pick up this rod right here. It is a 7-foot medium power, and it's a fast action. I have a medium light fast action as well, so I decided to get the medium fast action. I use this rod for my little bit heavier setup on a drop shot. Also, I can throw a weightless Senko on this. I can throw a shaky head on this. It's a pretty good multi-purpose rod as far as like a spinning rod goes. And I have it paired up with a Shimano Stratic CI4. It's the 2500. I really like the 2500. It's a little bit smaller. I know some people run the 3000. You can put a little more line on there, but I just kind of like the compactness of the 2500. And I haven't had any issues with it. It's been phenomenal. The drag system on this thing is just epic. I've landed that 6-pounder at Folsom and that 7-pounder at Hodges, and without really any issues. The drag system is perfect on this thing. So if there's any setup that I'm gonna recommend for you guys, if you guys are looking to get new setups or anything, I would really suggest spending maybe a little bit more money on your spinning reel and your spinning rod. The reason why is because your spinning rod, you want to have as much sensitivity out of it as possible. And by no means is this a really expensive rod. This is about a $140 rod, and I'm going to talk about my other one in a second. But if I'm going to spend any amount of money on one of my specific setups, it's going to be my spinning setup, because the sensitivity when they bite that worm, or when you're feeling the fish or you're feeling the bottom with the tungsten weight, you really want to be able to feel with that sensitive rod. So like I said, I'm a huge Jacob Wheeler fan, so I supported him by getting this rod, and I really like it. Really stoked about it. So yeah, this is my first rod. So now going to rod number 2 is my second spinning setup, and I'm from SoCal, so we throw a lot of finesse out here. So having 2 spinning setups for me is really ideal. Right now I have a weightless Senko tied on this one, but this is kind of also my kind of lighter drop shot setup. So I'll throw like a wacky rig or like a nose hook with like 6-pound line. Because on that one, on that reel right there, I forgot to say I have 20-pound Seaguar, the flash green smackdown braid, paired up with the 8-pound Abrazex Seaguar fluoro. And on this one right here, I have 15-pound braid, the same braid, Seaguar smackdown flash green, paired up to a 6-pound Tatsu fluorocarbon. I tie the RP knot. I kind of talked about that in one of my previous videos. But yeah, this is just a little bit lighter tip, so it's a medium light action, or a medium light fast action. So it just has a little bit more flexibility right here in this backbone part, and it has a nice sensitive tip. And this rod is incredible. This is the Micro Magic Pro. I don't know how well you guys can see that or not, but it's a Micro Magic Pro rod. I do have another Micro Magic Pro, but these rods right here are super awesome. I'll have all the rods and reels also in the description, but I believe that this rod sells for about $160, and then I have it paired up with another Shimano Stratic 2500 CI4. So yeah, these are my 2 spinning setups, and I catch probably 90% of my fish on these 2 setups right here. So now going over into my crankbait rod, I run the Duck It Ghost series. It's a medium Crankin stick, and it's a 7-foot Crankin stick. So I decided to get a 7-foot medium Crankin stick because I do throw a lot of square bills, and I also throw some Spro rock crawlers, some 3XDs on this rod. And I feel like my accuracy when I'm fishing a little bit more shallow is a lot better with a 7-foot rod compared to like a 7.6 or even a 7.3. So I really like this rod. I've caught a lot of fish on this rod right here. I run 12-pound fluorocarbon Invis-X on my Crankin setup, and the gear ratio on this is a SLX. This is the DC, the Shimano SLX DC. These reels just came out probably like less than a year ago, and this is the 150, and it's a 6.3. When I'm cranking, I really like a slower gear ratio. One of my buddies that I used to fish with a little bit ago, he kind of showed me like the 6.3, like just that gear ratio when you're cranking is kind of like that sweet spot. So I've been throwing that ever since, and I've had a lot of success on this setup right here. And I really like the parabolic bend that this rod has. Just keeping those fish pinned, I really suggest getting a cranking stick if you're cranking. So pretty basic, but at the same time, it took me a while to kind of figure out these kind of little hidden tricks in the trade, as far as I could say. So 12-pound fluoro, cranking stick, 6.3 gear ratio, whatever rod and reel you decide. But this is the setup I run. I really like the DC reels that Shimano made, the SLX. Price point's about $190, and this rod runs about 100 bucks. So pretty good setup for about $300. Again, it runs really well, and I've caught a lot of fish on this right here. So the next one I'm going to talk about is pretty much my jerkbait rod, and also my popper. You can throw a shaky head on this rod. But this one right here is a 6'10" medium power. It's the Silverado series by Duck It. This rod again runs about 100 bucks. I throw a 6'10" medium fast for my jerkbaits and my poppers, and even a shaky head or anything, kind of like any kind of worm like that. I like the shorter rod because when I'm jerking the jerkbait, especially out of a kayak, you know, you're not that high up out of the water, so you want a little bit of a shorter rod so you can really get that jerk motion going. And I have it paired up with a SLX XT. This is like the medium price point of the SLX series. I run a 7.2 gear ratio on that, and I run 10-pound fluorocarbon on my popper jerkbait kind of shaky head setup. So this is kind of like a 3-in-1 setup right here. You can also get away with some other baits too, but that's mainly what I throw on this is jerkbait, popper, and shaky head. Another little trick that I kind of do that I didn't really do for that long, but I started to do it recently, was I take a little piece of duct tape, or a little piece of tape, and I just write 10 right here on the reel. So that way I know that this is 10-pound fluoro. I have it pretty much on all my bait casters. It just helps me remember. I know there's like little tags or like maybe like little like nicer things other than like a piece of tape, but it just helps me to remember what pound test is on what, just so when I'm switching baits and switching reels sometimes to different rods, I can go ahead and remember what line is on what reel. So now moving over to my, pretty much, I mainly use this for my chatterbaits. And I know there's some differences of opinions on chatterbait rods, but what I throw my chatterbaits on is a medium heavy cranking stick. So it's basically like a medium heavy moderate action. It's a 7'6", so it's a little bit longer rod. And I really, really like the action that I can feel the vibration of the blade on that moderate action. And then when the fish come up and eat the chatterbait, it kind of gives a little bit of a give, so I'm not really yanking it out of their mouth. And I haven't had any issues with hook sets or losing a fish really on a chatterbait. I don't think I've ever lost a fish when I've hooked it on a chatterbait. So I know that some people throw a medium heavy fast action for their chatterbait rods, but I feel like this medium heavy, it's a moderate, but it says Crankin, but it's a moderate action. 7'6". I pair it up with 12-pound fluoro. Sometimes I even go 15 when I'm throwing it through grass and other thick cover, but I mainly throw 12, and then all my chatterbaits are jackhammers. I just really like the way that they're built and they fish, and I've had a lot of success with the jackhammer. So I have it paired up with the SLX DC. So mostly with like I would say like my workhorses, like my crankbait rod, my jackhammer chatterbait rod, or deep diving kind of crankbait rod. I have a little bit better of a reel on these setups just because they're my workhorses, so I just want a little bit better of a reel on there. The DC component, where it's like a digital braking system, so it just kind of makes casting really easy. It's super nice. Again, I have this is the Duckett Ghost XL. I don't really think they make the Ghost series anymore. I could be wrong, but I'm gonna link them all down in the description. They've kind of started to come out with some different rods. These rods are about 1 or 2 years old, but any kind of medium, heavy, moderate rod for a cranking stick or for a chatterbait in that 7'6" kind of area, I feel like for me is like just a sweet spot for a chatterbait or even a deep diving crank. I can even throw a spinnerbait on this as well. So this is pretty much that whole setup. Now I'm moving over to kind of like a multi-purpose rod. This is just a 7-foot, medium heavy fast. Right now I just have a swim bait head tied onto it, but I could throw a Texas rig, I could throw a jig. It's kind of like a multi-purpose rod. I could throw a spinnerbait on it as well. I have 12-pound Invisex on it. I throw all Seaguar, so this is Invisex, and I just throw straight fluoro. I'm gonna kind of experiment with maybe my jig setup about like a braid to monoliter or braid to leader on my jig setup, but for the most part I have all fluorocarbon on all my stuff except for my spinning rods, obviously. Again, it's a 7-foot fast. It's the Ghost series, so this is a $100 rod. And then I have it paired up with an SLX. I just switched over to all SLXs this year because I threw the Quantum Energy PT for a long time. That reel was awesome for me. I threw it for like 4 or 5 years, but I kind of just switched over to the Shimano line, and when they came out with the SLX, this is a $100 reel. It's the 150 and it's a 6.3 right now. Yeah. So this is my medium heavy fast action setup. Now moving over to kind of another multi-purpose rod, but this one's a little bit more specific of like a jig rod, spinnerbait rod. This is a 7'3" medium heavy fast. It's the Micro Magic Pro by Duckett, and this rod is awesome. This rod right here has a nice sensitive tip, but it has a nice strong backbone. I throw 15-pound Invisex on this rod, and right now I just have a pitch and jig tied on. But I'll throw a spinnerbait, I'll throw a heavier Texas rig on this, and I have it paired up with the SLX. And this is an 8.2 gear ratio. With my jigs and Texas rig kind of setup, you really want a higher gear ratio so you can pick up line quick. So I have an 8.2 gear ratio tied up with this setup right here, and this is another workhorse of mine. This is a phenomenal setup, phenomenal rod and reel. This is my jig kind of spinnerbait setup, heavy Texas rig. Now going over to my last and final setup that I carry. Right now I just have a Texas rig kind of weightless Senko on this right here, but I have 20-pound fluoro tied on this right now, but during the summertime, which is kind of coming up, I'll go ahead and throw a 65-pound braid on this, and this will be my frog rod. I love throwing a frog. Hopefully we'll get a bunch of good footage on a frog this year. This is a 7'3" heavy fast action rod. And I throw an A-rig on this rod during the like fall, winter, early springtime. Right now I have a kind of a heavy wired weightless Senko tied onto this right here when I'm pitching in tulies or heavy cover. I throw a 20-pound fluoro when I'm not throwing the frog. But again, I'm gonna be switching this reel out to a straight frog setup. And it's an 8.2. You want a really high gear ratio when you're throwing a frog or even an A-rig or a jig or weightless Senko. You want to be able to pick up line quick. So I have an 8.2 SLX on this, and this is just again the Ghost series. Yeah, this has been an awesome rod. I've caught a lot of frogfish on this rod, and it's been great. But that's gonna pretty much do it for my rod and reel review. One reel and rod that I'm probably gonna be picking up maybe towards the end of this year is a full-on swim bait setup rod. So if you guys have any recommendations of a swim bait setup rod and reel, I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts about that in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for following along. I'm gonna be fishing throughout this quarantine time, so there'll be content coming out. I also wanna do a garage review for you guys and kind of show you guys this whole setup behind me. And I have one more thing I want to add to it before I go ahead and show you guys the whole garage setup. So be on the lookout for that video. Be on the lookout for our other videos as well coming. And thank you guys so much for the support through this past like 6 months. We've really been trying to push our YouTube channel. If you guys aren't following us on Instagram, you guys can follow us at Basslims Fishing on Instagram. That's kind of like where we started. YouTube's kind of something that we did for a little bit, but now we're really trying to push our YouTube channel. So thank you guys so much for subscribing, for commenting. I really appreciate each and every one of you guys. Stay safe out there, guys. And as always, keep your thumbs ripped.